As her keel is laid in Detroit in 1957, she is the longest and most expensive ship ever designed for lake service. An $8 million beauty, longer than 2 football fields, with a hold huge enough to carry the Statue of Liberty. But as she is christened by Mrs. Edmond Fitzgerald, and 10,000 spectators look on, the ship slides into the harbor at a perilous angle. The huge vessel, 729 feet long and 75 feet wide, sends a huge wave crashing over the pier. Then she smashes into the dock with terrifying force. One man is so shaken by the sight, he suffers a heart attack and dies. And others swear that the Edmond Fitzgerald is trying to climb right out of the water. But for 17 years, the Fitzgerald is one of the champions of the waters. She sets records for the heaviest load ever carried on the Great Lakes, and for the fastest run by a ship her size. Below decks, she has staterooms for the use of important corporate clients. Although by 1975 she is not the longest of the lake freighters, she remains a proud flagship under the command of one of the most experienced captains on the seaway, Ernest McSorley. On this calm November morning, Indian summer embraces the giant ship as she pulls into port at the western end of the lake the native Indians call Gitchigumi, the big sea water. Riding high and empty, she berths at Burlington Northern Dock Number 1, ready to take on 50,000 gallons of fuel and more than 50 million pounds of iron ore pellets. The cargo pours out of loading chutes and fills 3 enormous storage compartments, separated by bulkhead walls that are not designed to be watertight. The weight pushes the Fitzgerald deeper and deeper until she draws more than 27 feet of water. But even fully loaded, she can travel 16 miles per hour, making her not only one of the biggest ships on the lakes, but one of the fastest. First mate Jack McCarthy supervises the loading of the cargo. He monitors 3 lights that warn if the ship is riding unevenly in the water. Green for a list to starboard. Red for a tilt to port. White means the Edmond Fitzgerald is level. McCarthy is a robust Irishman, adored by the crewmen he supervises.
I know through the years that Dad was very well thought of by crews. He was fair to them, and given 25 to 30 men working together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 9, 10, 12 months a year, it couldn't all be serious and by the book. And I think that with his experience, he knew how to take those liberties without jeopardizing any of the integrity of the crew or the operation of the boat. Captain McSorley and Dad made a pact to sail out their last years together. That means a lot. The Fitz was the biggest boat in the fleet. McSorley was the senior captain, and it was his pick of whom he wanted to be next to him in command.
Sunday.
The Fitzgerald will carry her cargo to a steel mill. There, in a process of hellish violence, the ore is melted in enormous blast furnaces. Then, forged with carbon to create steel, the steel skin of the trucks and cars produced in the great factories of the automobile industry. Supplying this insatiable appetite for iron, trip after trip, the Fitzgerald's mission is unglamorous and repetitive. But the equation is simple. Without ships like the Edmond Fitzgerald, there would be no motor cars. It takes only 6 hours to fully load Fitzgerald, and half an hour to seal each hatch with a 7-ton sheet of steel rimmed with 68 clamps. Each clamp must be tightened manually, each hold sealed watertight, because flooded compartments could drag the ship down to the bottom of the lake. It's a little past 2 in the afternoon when Captain McSorley slides the Edmond Fitzgerald away from the loading dock to begin her eastbound run. McSorley has spent 44 seasons on the water, working his way up from deckhand to ship's master. But he is 62, and the long days and nights at the helm have wearied him. His wife, Nellie, crippled by arthritis and a recent stroke, has been admitted to a nursing home. On a late October stopover, he promises his wife he will hurry home as soon as the shipping season ends. It won't be long, McSorley vows. It is their last meeting. Seamen like 22-year-old Bruce Hudson make up Fitzgerald's roster.
Bruce was a fun-loving boy and always loved adventure and having fun, and he loved people and was very friendly and was just a very outgoing person. He was very fond of the Fitzgerald when he went on it. He called her the Big Fitz. He was on board with a group of young men. There's about 6 of them around the same age. He spoke a lot about Mark Thomas and Carl Pickle and David Weiss and Tom Benson and a lot of them that he was friends with. Bruce thought John McCarthy was very nice, and they were close, and he liked John McCarthy a lot. And I know Mr. McCarthy did. I know that he looked after him when he could.
It requires only 29 men to smoothly run a ship that is more than 1/8 of a mile long. Wheelsmen like Gene O'Brien and Johnny Poviak. Down in the engine room, Chief Engineer George Hall, a serious, enigmatic man. Hall is a close friend of Ernest McSorley, and like the captain, the ship is his life. Under Hall's command, newcomer Tom Benson, a 23-year-old in his first season aboard the Fitzgerald. Rafferty, taken aboard at the last moment because the regular cook is laid up with ulcers. For the crew, the Edmond Fitzgerald is both workplace and home. There is a sameness to the daily routine, but the work is well-paying. The bond among crewmates strong. A year of lake service brings 10 months of a comfortable room and hearty meals aboard ship, and a 2-month winter vacation. A life without traffic jams or shopping malls, ruled by the rhythm of the seasons. As she heads east, the Edmond Fitzgerald is racing the northern winter. Within a month, Superior's harbors will have begun to freeze over. By Christmas, The big ships will be castles of ice, frozen to their home ports. But between summer's calm and winter's grip lies the season of storms. It is fickle November, the month of storms, that haunts the Great Lakes sailors. On this day, distant and as yet unseen, two volatile air masses are on a collision course that will churn Lake Superior into an evil frenzy and put everyone on the big lake freighters into a desperate battle to survive. At 4:30 in the afternoon, another giant ore carrier, the Arthur Anderson, 767 feet long, departs her home port under the command of Captain Bernie Cooper. Cooper has more than 30 years of experience sailing the Great Lakes. His first mate, Morgan Clark, is another Great Lakes veteran. Like Ernest McSorley, Bernie Cooper is also trying to squeeze in one last run before winter shuts down the Seaway. The two huge freighters are heading for the Seaway locks at Sault Ste. Marie at the opposite end of Lake Superior, a 2-day sail to the east. For 300 miles, they will play follow the leader, with the heavier, slower Anderson lagging 10 to 20 miles behind. The unpredictable November weather will worsen with astonishing swiftness. By the next afternoon, Lake Superior will rise in all her fury. By the next evening, only one of the two giant ships will still be afloat.
The wind and the wires made a tattletale sound, and the wave broke over the railing. Every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing.
As they churn eastward across Lake Superior, the fates of two giant merchant ships are inexorably linked. Aboard the Arthur Anderson, Captain Bernie Cooper plots his own weather charts, and he radios to the bridge of the Edmond Fitzgerald that the weather is getting worse, much worse. At about 9 p.m., the ships are proceeding eastward under worsening conditions when they receive the report of a gale warning. It forecasts winds of 40 to 50 miles per hour and seas running at 10 feet.
Whenever you start to get gale warnings, the word goes around the ship. You know, we call all the galley, we call the engineers, and you send your forward end crew on to dog everything down, to make sure everything is tight. You check your clamps on your deck.
Captain Cooper and Fitzgerald master Ernest McSorley, with more than 80 years of sailing experience between them, decide to change course. They leave the traditional shipping lanes at the south end of the lake and head north. By hugging the Canadian shoreline, they hope to gain shelter from the northeast gale. On the greatest of the Great Lakes, the seas are running at 10 feet and building fast. The weather steadily worsens. At 1 a.m., visibility is reduced to 2 miles in heavy rain. Winds gust to 60 miles per hour. By daybreak, the calm of the previous morning has become a distant dream. Giant waves wash over the cargo deck. But there's no panic. These men have been through many storms before. It is business as usual. Captain Bernie Cooper tries to calculate the probable course of the storm. High above the ship, a swirling mass of clouds is building, hacking winds of hurricane force, with gusts of nearly 100 miles per hour. And the worst of the weather is blowing right toward the two ships. Just after noon on November 10th, Cooper and McSorley plot their next move. They will turn south. To reach Sault Ste. Marie, they'll have to pass close to the treacherous 6-fathom shoal just north of Caribou Island. 36 feet of churning water, hiding jagged rocks that can tear a ship to shreds. At 2:45, the Edmond Fitzgerald is 10 miles ahead of the Anderson, steering southeast in 16-foot waves. A vicious crosswind lashes the ships. Now it begins to snow. In the whiteout, Cooper can only locate the Fitzgerald's position by radar. Cooper's radar shows the Fitzgerald and her 26,000 tons of cargo perilously close to 6-fathom shoal. With only 9 feet of clearance, even in calm conditions, she's much too close. A few minutes later, aboard the Edmond Fitzgerald, Captain McSorley makes his first report of trouble.
Well, he called me up. That was 3:10 in the afternoon. And he said, I've got a little problem. He said, my fence rail is down. He said, I've got 2 vents missing, and I've taken a starboard list. Now, that immediate list, again, tells me that he either had a stress fracture or he bottomed out. He said he had his pumps on. I asked him if he had his pumps on. He said yes. And later on, he said that he wasn't gaining anything by pumping out on it, so the water was coming in the hull as fast as they were pumping it out.
Concerned about the water flooding his cargo holds, McSorley slows the Fitzgerald and asks the Anderson to catch up to him as he fights his way toward a safe harbor, a harbor he will never reach. It's 4 p.m. Aboard the cargo ship Arthur Anderson, Captain Bernie Cooper is recording 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts under a savage, darkening sky. And just ahead of him, invisible in the raging storm, the Edmond Fitzgerald and the 29 men who sail in her are engaged in a life-or-death struggle with the fury of Lake Superior. 10 minutes later, Captain Ernest McSorley reports that his radar masts have been disabled by the wind. At 4:30, the lighthouse and radio beacon at Whitefish Point go dark and silent when their power lines are blown down. Without radar or shore lights to guide him, and with only a radio phone for communication with other ships, the Edmond Fitzgerald is sailing blind through the tempest with 30-foot waves coming over her decks. At 5 o'clock, McSorley asks First Mate Morgan Clark aboard the Anderson to check his position. Scanning his radar screen, Clark reports that the Edmond Fitzgerald is 3.5 miles from Whitefish Point. For McSorley, this is good news. He had hoped to keep at least 2 miles of open water between his ship and the shoreline he cannot see. 5:30 p.m. Captain McSorley, increasingly desperate to contact any nearby vessel, radios to a Swedish ship in Whitefish Bay that he is taking heavy seas over his cargo deck. He has been on the Great Lakes for 44 years, but this is the worst he has ever seen. 6:40, just clear of Caribou Island, the Anderson is rocked by 2 gigantic waves in rapid succession. 35-foot towers of water crash down on the ship. The Anderson survives, but waves as powerful as those found in a mid-ocean cyclone are bearing down on the Edmond Fitzgerald from behind. In a few minutes, they will catch up to her. At 7:10 p.m., Ernest McSorley gets a final position fix from the Anderson. Morgan Clark asks how the Edmond Fitzgerald is faring. McSorley replies, "We are holding our own." These are the last words from the Edmond Fitzgerald. At 7:30, the snow eases. Bernie Cooper searches the horizon for the lights of the Fitzgerald. But there are no lights. And the radar screen aboard the Anderson shows nothing. The big Fitz has disappeared. Again and again, Morgan Clark tries to raise McSorley by radio. In reply, there is only silence. Bernie Cooper calls the Coast Guard. "I'm very concerned. He was right in front of us. I can see no lights. I just hope he didn't take a nosedive." As the Anderson reaches the safety of Whitefish Bay, the U.S. Coast Guard initiates a search for the Edmond Fitzgerald. But every rescue ship at its disposal is either broken down, too small, or too far away to be of use. An hour later, an air search is begun by the American and Canadian Coast Guards, but they find no one to rescue. The Coast Guard asks Bernie Cooper to take his ship back into the storm to join the search.
Captain Milrad, he asked me if I'd personally go back out, and I was reluctant to go. Really, I was. But he said there's a ship on the bottom, and I felt like saying there could be two if I go back, you know, but I finally decided I'd go out. When we went down and turned around, I went out to Whitefish Point at the same distance we were off when we came down. And then I headed the ship west-northwest directly into the wind from our last position that we had of the Fitzgerald.
Seven other ships safely anchored in Whitefish Bay also are asked to help. Only one, the William Clay Ford, agrees to join the Anderson.
The first time I talked to the Coast Guard, I said, no, I wouldn't go out there. And that's why I went to anchor in the first place, to stay out of the storm. After I told the Coast Guard, no, I wouldn't go out there, I went down my room and thought about it for a while, and I decided, well, somebody's got to go out there, so I called the Coast Guard and told them we'd pick up the anchor and go.
As the two ships battle back through the gale, the helicopter sweeps the waves with searchlights. Nothing is seen.
We pretty well knew just after it happened that Fitzgerald was gone. We talked to the Anderson. In fact, Bernie Cooper called me up and asked me if I'd seen anything come around a point. And I told him, no, we didn't see anything coming around a point. And he says, well, the Fitzgerald was right ahead of us. And he says, now we can't see him on radar. We can't see him visually. He says, so something happened to him.
All night, the Ford and the Anderson crisscross the area.
There was probably a steady stream of 20-foot seas. I think it was 5:30 in the morning, just before daylight. Well, it was quite a bit before daylight. We started running through a lot of debris, gas tanks, you know, like for the stoves, life preservers, oars, canisters, but no sign of anybody else. Probably 11 o'clock in the morning, the third mate was still up in the bridge. And, you know, these fellows had spent all their time up there. And he spotted the lifeboat. There was only a half a lifeboat. It looked like a giant hand had just torn it right in two.
We searched for 3 days in probably the roughest seas I've ever been in my life, including the North Atlantic and hurricanes in the Gulf, because you got 3 different seas from 3 different directions. At one point we rolled 51 degrees. It was a real quick snap roll, and my XO went flying across the bridge and was actually standing on the bulkhead, on the port bulkhead. If the door had been open to the port bridge wing, he'd have went right on over the side. It was really bad.
An air and sea search is continuing for possible survivors of the Edmond Fitzgerald, a 729-foot ore carrier, which apparently broke apart and sunk last night on Lake Superior. The ship and its 29-man crew vanished in a storm with 80-mile-an-hour winds and wave heights up to 25 feet. All that has been found is an oil slick and some debris.
The news goes out. The pride of the Great Lakes Fleet has vanished with all hands.
The lady that was my boss, she got on the phone and she said to me, Florence, what ship was Tom on? Because she knew Tom had sailed many ships. And I said, the Fitzgerald. And she said, don't go anywhere. She said, stay there. And she said, they'll probably call you and tell you. And they never did call. I don't think they ever, I don't know. It seemed like it was days before Ogilvy Norton ever called me.
29 families anxiously follow the search. The watchman, Ray Cundy's wife, Doreen. It is a terrible ordeal.
When I came home after bingo, and I automatically put the TV on. And I just happened to glance over the TV, and across the TV was this here. Edmond Fitzgerald, feared, sunk, Lake Superior. A friend of mine from downtown called, and she says, Doreen, guess what? The Fitzgerald has sunk, and all the men in it are dead. I said, that's a poor, cruel joke. And I called him a bad name, and I hung up. Then I looked at the TV again. Damn it, I seen it again. Then I knew that there was something to this.
For 2 days, bits of debris are found. An inflatable raft, life preservers, but no bodies and no survivors.
We've been concentrating in a rather small search area because we had a pretty definite position about where the Fitzgerald went down since she disappeared from the radar screen of the Arthur M. Anderson. We had a lot of vessels in the area this morning, about 6 aircraft all day, and we found quite a bit of debris.
You assume the ship has gone down. Is there now any hope for survivors at all?
Well, it would seem very dim at this point, with almost 24 hours that they've been in the water, 50-degree water. You don't normally survive much longer than 3 to 4 hours.
On November 14th, 4 days after the Edmond Fitzgerald disappears, a U.S. Navy aircraft carrying magnetic detection equipment senses a large object on the bottom of Lake Superior. Later, a Navy ship confirms the find with sonar. The word is one of the most chilling in our language. Shipwreck. A vessel built to rule the seas, consumed by the seas. For centuries, human ingenuity and enterprise have struggled to build stronger ships, safer ships. But still, sometimes, the sea prevails. One moment, the Edmond Fitzgerald was the pride of the Great Lakes fleet. The next, she was gone. One fact seems clear. Before she went down, she must have taken on thousands of gallons of water. But how did that water get into her holds and below her decks?
In my mind, I'm convinced that she took water on from topside. Whether it physically lost the hatch, I don't know. But I know that with the hatch gaskets loose, hatch clamps loose, and we found all kinds of them loose. It's a hard job. The clamps are a very good clamp, but if they're going to do their job right, it's a lot of work to snap them into place. People keep asking me, well, what caused the loss of the Fitzgerald? And my answer is complacency.
Any suggestion of negligence on the part of the Fitzgerald's crew is controversial. Few freighter captains support the Coast Guard's findings. One who opposes was piloting a Swedish freighter through the treacherous Superior channels the night the Edmond Fitzgerald went down. Cedric Woodard was one of the last to talk to Ernest McSorley.
Nobody will ever know what happened, but I would swear 100% it wasn't hatch covers. Because I've been in Starman hatch covers and go down the hole and watch them with the same hatch covers. And I went down and watched seawood water. Maybe a cupful would come through or something. And if her hatches were much worse, if her hatch then had no clamps on, that much water wouldn't have come in, because them hatches weighs tons, and they sit there, and they can't get off. So how could that much water come through?
The first unmanned underwater survey in 1976 shows the Fitzgerald broken into two sections, lying at an angle to each other, with a mass of iron ore pellets and twisted wreckage on the lake bed between them. 2 years later, a 50-page report concludes that ineffective closure of the cargo hatches allowed water to penetrate the hold and weigh the ship down.
It's like the little Dutch boy in the dike with the finger in the dike. It doesn't take a very big hole, and you start taking water on. If the water is forward, and that's where we found the clamps that were not tight. If you take on the water forward, then it goes down by the bow. If it's down by the bow, your pumps won't take the water out because all the water's forward and all your pumps pump from aft.
But not everyone is convinced. Some believe the Fitzgerald suffered a fate similar to the ore carrier Daniel J. Morrell, which broke in half on another wild November night 9 years earlier. Bernie Cooper believes an uncharted shoal marked the beginning of the end for the Edmond Fitzgerald.
I don't care what anybody says. At 3:10 in the afternoon, she had either bottomed out or had a stress fracture of the hull. That's the only two possibilities I have. She was sinking from that time on. My opinion is she bottomed out.
No one will ever know if the Fitzgerald scraped bottom or where. The great mystery remains the suddenness of the Fitzgerald's disappearance. For hours, she was in frequent radio contact with the Anderson and other ships. McSorley's radio phone was always at arm's length. Yet she went down without a single cry of mayday. Captain Bernie Cooper believes she was swallowed by a single monstrous wave.
I think it was sudden and catastrophic. The ship just disappeared completely. I mean, if those seas were that big, they rolled up his deck, and he's got a list, and the water stays up in the forward cabin. It's going to put his bow down under the water. And once she started down, the screw just drove her into the bottom.
In the summer of 1995, a final mission descends into Superior's black depths. The mission? To recover the ship's bell, to once again hear the voice of the Edmond Fitzgerald. The bell will be taken to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Museum at Whitefish Point. In its place, a new brass bell, inscribed with the names of the 29 men who died, will become an eternal memorial, returned forever to the wreck of the Edmond Fitzgerald.
History tells us that the chaos of all the elements was used to form a harmony that created this beautiful and awesome world of ours. And the greatest wonder of that creation was the dignity of human life. It was the same chaos of the elements 20 years ago that took the Edmond Fitzgerald and ended the journey of life for 29 men. We remember that the chaos of that night is below us right now, but it's one of quietness and one of solitude. And we pray that this bell that goes down on this ship will be a sign to everyone to remember the dignity of this place and keep it a place of gentle solitude.
gathered here today in the weather that is keeping us cold and chilly.
It is with great pride and a great deal of humility that I present this bell on behalf of the people of Ontario to the people of Michigan, and especially to the families of the Edmond Fitzgerald crew.
The men deserve the memorial, and they should have had it a long time ago, but they finally got it.
Being out there on that spot gave me peace of mind because the sun was shining, the sky was clear, the water was beautiful, and it filled that void for me.
To Tom Farnquist, we can't put into words our gratitude and heartfelt thanks for all you've done.
Last November, I was invited by family members to Detroit to Mariners Church and asked why we were diving the Fitzgerald. I had a hard time answering that question. We were intruding on their gravesite, the gravesite of their loved ones. At that time, we promised that we would never return to the Fitzgerald. We will keep our word. Let today really mark the end of diving on the Edmond Fitzgerald and the beginning for a memorial at Whitefish Point. Thank you very much.
And I've got to say, due to the long list of contributors and supporters, all we can just say is, thank you very much.
As we remember the men, as we hear the bell toll, we should grieve. But we should also not forget to celebrate their lives as well. As the bell is in their hearts, so they are in the bell. And in the bell's tone are the voices of the men, and we should listen. Ernest M. McSorley, Master. First Mate John H. McCarthy. Oiler Thomas Benson. Deckhand Bruce L. Hudson. Second Assistant Engineer Russell G. Haskell. Cadet of the Deck David E. Weiss.
Superior, they said, never gives up the dead when the gales are early.
Third Assistant Engineer Oliver J. Champeau. The 30th ring, and it is for all the mariner sailors who have lost their lives on the Great Lakes.